what things and have
Good
what
afternoon, Rick.
effects,
This is Adam Sturch
and then
broadcasting from the
collect
Mushroom
these plants
Mansion,
and subject them to
Taos,
rigorous
New Mexico.
scientific analysis and
Making sure my
characterization.
aperture is
I think
okay.
there's a great deal of
And
work
working
to
on
be done
oil
in the
painting
field in
red,
Africa.
third in the
One of
primary
things
triptych.
that you will hear
Okay,
me say in the course of
what I
this
started
video
last time were these
is
sort of
to
mercurial
indicate
globs
interesting
floating
problems,
around in this dark space.
for
And it sort of formed a
looking
head
for,
right here
doctoral
with a neck
dissertations
craned,
or field
maybe to the
projects,
left there.
the
And
great,
so what I'm going to do, in the vein of the old
scandal
drawing of
of
mine,
psychedelic
Mercurial
research
Mind, which is
is
just
that they're
a big
atypical,
cracking
that it has been
Fabergé
driven
egg
underground,
with
that
mercury
people do
droplets
not do
pouring out of it,
the work,
and each one
and
reflects a little figure.
consequently, this is
But in this one, I'm going to have the reflections be more
suppression of knowledge. You do not fund the projects, you
amorphous
do not
and
publish papers, you do not
keep
promote
it
the
a
researchers
little
who
bit more
do the work,
abstracted
and
as to
suddenly
the overall
entire field of
content,
knowledge
but
is
still use the same
discredited
sort
or
of
ultimately
globular
abandoned
reflective
or
forms,
forgotten.
which I think also is going to work well with yellow second in the primary triptych. If I can loosen my tripod, spin it over to this. As you can see, this form here is developing kind of a golden shine, and I think I'm going to run with that, make that one very shiny, or make that form very shiny, and then do a similar treatment to these, which will place it on either side of the blue as a complete triptych in theme as well as primary color theme. So yeah, okay, here we go.
Proceed faster than the development of language, and that in fact cultural development is the fallout from advances in the evolution of language. What I am trying to do, and what I urge other people to do, is create a common language about this stuff. Occasionally I have the experience, after giving a particularly wide-ranging talk on this subject, of having someone come up to me afterwards and say, "I thought I was crazy till I heard you speak. And now I realize other people know these things too." Okay, this phrase, "I thought I was crazy," means I thought no one understood me. I thought there was no commonality of language. But hearing you speak, I understand that there is a commonality of language. So I think that building a support system for the exploring and pioneering class among us means building a common language about these experiences. I have seen this go on over the past 25 years because I was fortunate enough to be at the center of the psychedelic thing, or at a center of the psychedelic thing, throughout much of its evolution. And I remember in 1965, when Sandoz LSD was released everywhere, basically, that was much in evidence on the Berkeley campus. Yes, we took LSD, but it was in between the trips. You would just feel out into the environment and say, what is different? And the answer was, everything is changing. I am changing, the people around me are changing, the culture is changing. The flux was almost palpable. This was because a set of new linguistic modalities were being put in place. And however much they may be derided as cliches, they actually have given permission for new kinds of relating between people. So notions like ego trip, before that, you had to explain to people what an ego trip was, and then once they got it, they behaved much better. It was like a sudden rise to a new level of sensitivity vis-a-vis the matter of what is couth. People had been getting away with all kinds of psychic sloppiness to which they were suddenly held account. So I think really the task of building community is the task of building language. And of course, the more community, the more verbal interaction, the more language. The more people who have these experiences and feed them back into the collectivity with their conclusions, the more there is a basis for understanding. And it's surprisingly specific. Once after a talk, a woman came up to me, and many people were waiting to talk, and she waited, and then she came, and she was very shy, and she said, do you ever have problems with pterodactyls? And I said very nicely that no, I never had a problem. Well, it wasn't a week until I had a tremendous problem with one. And, you know, I realized that, oh, this is what this woman was talking about. And, you know, so in a way, she empowered my unconscious to lead me into that place. And so stifling discussion about psychedelics is the most detrimental thing that can be done. And we really need to tear the lid off this, if not to do it, at least to talk about it. And I think that will then create the climate where more serious things can be done. Further back.
What was your problem with pterodactyls?
What was my problem with pterodactyls? Someone fishing for a story. Well, I had taken some mushrooms, and I was waiting for them to come on, and it was about the 50-minute mark, and it was beginning to come on, and its typical form of presentation is it has this kind of octopoid or silk scarf-like quality where it just falls upon you as though from the ceiling, and then you're enveloped in it, and you mustn't struggle, you must just observe. And I was sort of to that place with it, and suddenly there was a feeling of retraction, and like cold air was how I described it to myself. And the dog next door, who had never before howled, in fact I didn't know there was a dog next door, suddenly howled. And this feeling of coldness and retraction and the howling dog, and I sort of sat up and said, that's funny. And at that moment the crossbeam, which was a few feet above my head, gave a groan, as with the sound of leathery wings, something settled apparently onto the roof of my house. And I was completely flabbergasted. To the point where I was not even alarmed, it was more like, come on, you know? And so I just sat with it for about 15 seconds, and then I directed my attention through the roof at whatever was there, and said something which seemed odd to me to say. I said, "Be gone. Can't you see that I am in conversation with an elder?" And I had never ever before actually referred to the mushroom as an elder. This thing just sort of came out of my mouth. And there was a kind of a standoff, feeling of standoff. And then the being groaned, and I heard the beat of leathery wings, and this thing went away. And later I saw this woman again, the one who had asked the question, and I said I didn't understand what you meant about the pterodactyls, but then I had this experience, and I said my impression was that they're very stupid. And she said, yes, they're very stupid, but when the doorway is opening, they come and stand around. And that's exactly what it was. Okay, so then you turn this over to a straight therapist or something, and they say, you know, this is clearly an antediluvian projection from the collective. Well, I don't know. It does seem as though there are forces and powers which haunt these other realms where one is much wiser to simply go with tradition and find out, what's going on. There are apparently dumb spirits or dumb forces which hang around, with which you must deal sternly. Now, I don't claim that this is true. I only describe operational experiences because I have no patience with table knocking. I regard undrugged channeling as a manifestation of mental illness. The tide must be turning on that issue. I used to get booed for saying. Back here, in the rainbow green.
You spoke a lot about the evolution of consciousness and the role that psychedelic drugs have played, specifically in primate evolution. I'm curious as to how the experience, the psychoactively induced experiences of apes are possibly transmitted and contributing to the evolution of consciousness. Could you?
You mean, how did it happen?
Right.
Is that your question? Well, the pivotal part of the argument, aside from visual acuity, increased interest in sex and all that, was language. That and this is not well understood, and because we're not allowed to do research, we're not likely to understand it for a while. But notice that I have engaged my mind to my audio mechanism, and what I'm doing is I'm making small mouth noises, and you are looking in a dictionary, which you have learned and keep in your head, to decode these small mouth noises that I'm making. Now, the assumption operating here is that your dictionary and my dictionary are enough alike that you will actually reconstruct my thought by using your dictionary. But it seems to me this is probably a very late developed function of language, and that its original use was to entertain, and that evolution placed a high premium on being able to deliver a string of highly modulated vocal sounds. And the discovery that these vocal sounds could be used to signify objects or intention probably came very late. You probably know about the phenomenon called audio driving, where with drumming you convey in yourself or other people into altered states of consciousness. Well, I think drumming is really secondarily powerful in comparison to chanting, and that the repetition of tone and the evolution of mantric sound and the experimentation with acoustically driving the nervous system probably was an early form of entertainment for people. And the fact that on psilocybin, for instance, one can experience synesthesias, see colors, taste sounds, feel idea complexes, made it a form of entertainment. Cognitive activity is what we seem to be set up for. We do it and invent new ways of doing it, and this feedback loop was in place very early, probably before this grassland adaptation began to take place. So, in my estimation, it's the impact of the psychedelics primarily on language that drove our ancestors into a category different from that of any other animals that had ever arisen on the earth. And then people say, well, what about dolphins and what about this? Well, that's very different. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't language, but we really swim in a linguistic ocean. We really do it, and we make artifacts, and by everything we say, do, feel, think, and create, we organize matter and meaning into higher states of itself. this seems to be the psychedelic function happening. Yeah.
In the routine use of psychedelics to create on some kind of permanent basis an altered state of consciousness, I wonder if you could address any concerns you have about the effects physiologically, like on the nervous system, and whether there is a price you pay for doing this.
Is there a price to pay? Well, it's a very important question. This is why, and this has again gotten me in trouble in some quarters, I'm a very keen advocate of use of plants rather than drugs, because if you take a plant which has been used shamanically for thousands and thousands of years, the human use trials have been done. We know that it doesn't cause miscarriages, tumors, blindness, ulcers, because people for thousands and thousands of years have been doing this. If, on the other hand, you set out to chemically explore reality and your tools are going to be synthetic drugs, because of the prohibition on legal research into synthetic drugs, we have no data whatsoever on synthetic drugs. The best researched is LSD, because there was some research done before it was made illegal, and we don't have answers to what LSD does, or even if it does anything. The MDMA family of compounds, no data exists except ex post facto data, now that people are alarmed about it, about what these things do. So when this question that you asked usually comes up in these sessions, and for those of you who've heard me say this before, bear with me, because this is operationally important information that needs to be repeated. It is, if you are seriously considering using the psychedelic experience as an adjunct to spiritual growth, then here are the 3 criteria that you should apply to the tool that you may choose. Does it occur in a plant? If it does, this establishes it as a biological molecule, a thing not unfriendly to life. Molecules like ketamine, you can search the planet from pole to pole and you won't find a ketamine molecule in a naturally evolving system. Okay, so the first criteria is, does it occur in a plant? Second criteria, does it have a history of shamanic usage? Because you can kill yourself with plants, don't doubt it for a moment. A plant like Strychnos nox vomica or the curare, I mean, these things will do you in just like a bullet through the head. So the second criteria is, does it have a history of shamanic usage? It should. That establishes it as a proper vehicle for this kind of work. And then the third and most important category to my mind is, does it bear a reasonable affinity to compounds already present in the ordinary human brain? Now, in other words, is it non-invasive? You don't want to put something into these things cross the blood-brain barrier. They actually go to your brain. You do not want to put something in your brain that has no business being there. So the only way to know if the brain is a friendly environment to a compound is to see if closely related compounds are already comfortably accommodated there. Well, now I've laid these 3 horrendous prohibitions on you. It should occur in a plant, it should have a history of shamanic usage, it should be non-insulting to the brain. But the good news is, the most powerful psychedelics that exist pass all 3 tests. As an example, I will speak of the most powerful psychedelic which exists, which is N,N-dimethyltryptamine. It is It occurs in the ordinary human brain. Every single one of us has it in our brain at this moment. It's also a Schedule 1 drug, so that's food for thought. Amazonian shamanism is very strongly based on activation of DMT in combination with other things and by itself. And of course, DMT is the most common of all hallucinogens in nature. And so then, let's think about DMT for a moment. Strongest hallucinogen known to exist, or known by me to exist, and I certainly desire nothing stronger, let me tell you. It only lasts 5 or 10 minutes, and then you are completely restored to the kind of equilibrium that you enjoyed before the experience.
That starts defining the form of the head
lag.
a bit
You don't
more.
come down a notch, you simply return
Trying
to where
to
you
decide whether or
started
not I
from.
want to turn this
Well, now,
into a
what
double
does
session and do another set of the
neuropharmacologist
blobs and
think,
shadows,
looking at that?
or just doing
Well,
one at a
what
time,
she thinks is that
or one session at a time.
it's very acceptable to the brain. What happens is this stuff comes across the blood-brain barrier, and immediately enzyme systems in the brain
It's pretty
spring
saturated.
into action, fully
If I do more
recognize what
blobs,
this
I think I'll
compound
end
is,
up
rush
running over the
forward,
ones I've already
attach
done.
themselves to it,
And I really
snip it
kind of
to
need to let each
pieces,
layer
and
set up.
turn it into a harmless byproduct.
And as it
all in
is, it's
about 10
retaining
minutes.
somewhat of a
In other
translucency
words,
for each
DMT,
layer of
the most
blobs,
powerful hallucinogen
and I would
there
like
is,
to
behaves in
use
the
that
brain
a
the
little
way
bit,
a
even though I
small
do
ice
intend on
cube
going back
behaves
and
in your
reinforcing
closed
highlights
fist.
and shadows with a
Just
more
disappears
opaque
after a minute
array
or so.
of red tones.
So, I'm not
So yeah, that's it for the
comfortable
moment.
with
Thanks for watching
idea
this Adam
that
Search
we
broadcasting
need
from the
to
Mushroom Mansion
design
Palace
a
in
better
Mexico, working on the oil
psychedelic,
painting,
or we
Red,
need
third in the
to
primary
unleash
triptych.
pharmaceutical
Have a good day.
chemists to produce some kind of super